full freedom of walking, and there were no restrictions at first.
And then what happened?
Then, within about, this happened sometimes mid of 1940, there was an action on a street, and number of maybe couple of hundred of young, able-bodied men were taken over into trucks.
Were they wearing yellow stars?
There was no yellow stars yet.
And where'd they go in the trucks?
And they took us to the southern eastern, well, actually eastern part of Poland. And we were building for about 6 months highways.
I understand you were one of the men in the trucks?
Yes.
You were taken away?
Yes, it was my brother. We both went.
And your father?
My father not. He probably was at that time too old to be considered. They wanted the youth. And we really had a tough job carrying various sand and stones and bricks, etc., to lay the new roads. And just, I couldn't understand what they suddenly decided to build stones. But later it dawned on me that what there was preparation already end of 1939, beginning of 1940, they were already preparing themselves, Germany, to go to conquer Russia. That's why they were building these roads. After 6 months, the conditions, the hygienic conditions were terrible. We slept in, fortunately it was not winter yet, it was summer and maybe fall, and we were sleeping in barns, and we were, forgive me, loused up, literally, and sleeping maybe body to body to body right next to each other. And then, of course, food was very, very limited, and we worked about 10, 12 hours. We finished the segment of whatever was planned by Germans, and we were shipped back to Częstochowa.
This is after 6 months?
This was about after 6 months. We are now saying mid-1940. And shortly thereafter, they, not shortly, maybe 6 months or so later, they introduced what was subsequently called the large ghetto. But this was the first ghetto, and only limited enclosure was necessary. There were no wires. There were no guards. But
what type of physical boundary surrounded the ghetto?
There were certain streets showed that where not to go through. And then everybody had to vacate the areas which was not part of the large ghetto, and we were among them, and we went to that large ghetto. And at that time already they we were wearing the yellow patches, the Star of David.
And so you had did Polish people have to vacate where they lived in order for the Jews to move into a certain restricted area?
Yes, they had to vacate, but part of the large ghetto was in that old part of town where majority of inhabitants were Jews.
So when did your family move?
Yes, we moved to that large ghetto.
Do you remember the day you moved? What you felt like?
It was sometimes in end of 1940. I'm not so sure even what time of the year it was.
Was everyone in a rush? Do you remember the atmosphere the day you had to vacate your home to move into the
It was
ghetto?
not as chaotic as subsequently. This was not really, it was not an action. It was only squeezing of the population in smaller quarters, but was not an action that those who had to, that some of the Jews were taken to extermination camps or to other placówki, what we call it, other working places where some people stayed throughout.
So you moved into this ghetto, and how did life change then?
Life changed, of course, that we already had limited access. We were not permitted to leave the geographic area to which we were confined, though there was not strict control yet. But if someone would get caught outside as a Jew, and of course he wouldn't dare doing it with wearing a Star of David, he was tough measures were, of course, exercised.
By whom?
By the Germans.
Was there a Judenrat?
I'm sorry?
Was there an organization within the ghetto headed by the Jews?
Around this time, yes, that there was already an organization formed, and
Do you know who the head of it was?
ends with a ski, Roshinsky, I don't remember.
Did you have a radio when you were in the ghetto?
I'm sorry?
Did your family still have their radio?
Yes, we had still radios.
And what was your awareness of what was going on outside the
Of course,
ghetto?
by that time we were fully aware what's going on around.
Like what?
But
What
actions that Jews were started to be persecuted in increasing level, and new restrictions were practically imposed on us on a daily basis. There was no congregation of Jews, that certain areas were not accessible to us, and this lasted till about 1940, beginning of 42, that the next step in actions by Germans took place, and this was, of course, putting everyone in small ghettos, and the people had to go through this what's called selection. And
Did you go through selection?
oh yes.
What happened?
Well, my brother and I were permitted to stay in. We did not go to Treblinka, because those who, of course, were not allowed to go back, they were just simply going towards the how you call these wagons? The
Cattle cars?
cattle cars.
Do you remember the day of the action where they liquidated the ghetto?
Was someone in 1942. I don't remember the date.
Do you remember what it looked like, what it sounded like? Do you remember the day?
There were several days, because various parts of town were told not to get out of our houses. And in an organized fashion, we were by certain blocks of streets that we were told to go to the common place, the market, center of that limited area. And there was a bunch of assessment, and of course, as we were getting closer, either we were told to go to one side or the other side, and it became quite clear what's going on. That's where I lost my parents. My parents were taken to the train to Treblinka. My sister.
Were you able to do you remember the last words you said to each other?
No.
Was it pandemonium?
It was a great pandemonium. We were losing each other. There were continuously, you made one wrong step, they were hitting you with how do you call it? This
A whip?
A whip.
Were you
or
walking
actually
or
with
running?
the butt of the gun of a rifle.
So you were with your 5 family members?
We were all together until they
And you were
took
running?
my brother and my sister. My brother and I were taken to one side. My parents were to the other side. My sister at that time, we had a friend, maybe even a boyfriend, who was part of the Jewish policemen, and they were treated somewhat better, and they were permitted to go to the same area with their wives. So she was taken together with the boyfriend, and at least survived that part until we all were placed into the small ghetto, which shortly thereafter was barbed wires through the whole area.
Was it still called?
Small ghetto, that was called then.
By what name? In the same city? It was
Częstochowa was still.
Częstochowa?
Small ghetto of Częstochowa, yes.
And did your parents know where they were headed when they entered the cattle car? Do you know if they knew?
No. There's a certain with an intellectual or with a certain
Intuition?
mechanism of not accepting it, not thinking of the words, self-preservation. They, of course, Germans did not announce it that they are going to the Treblinka. They're going to some other actions. I forgot what was the excuse given to a different town or whatever, that they won't have to be working hard. Whereas those staying in were pushed back, and of course became aware within a couple of hours that we are parted. They went somewhere away, and as difficult was it to accept the concept that they'll be dead tomorrow. But we thought, well, maybe going to a place of work that they don't need the young people. Everyone tried to conceptualize for their own self-preservation, not to accept that, just accept the naked death that just dropping on you suddenly.
So when or how did your sister and brother and you rejoin?
Well, we rejoined in a small ghetto. We came together, and by that time, of course, we were squeezed like herrings in small little rooms.
Where did you live?
This was the old part of the city.
What were your living quarters like?
We had one room, and there were about one room and a kitchen, and there was maybe 8 of us. So it's just on cots, sleeping on sometimes 2 people sharing one cot.
Who were the other people?
And so did the other people did. I mean, there was no luxury then. Of course, by that time we were self-organization. There was what was the name? Krupinski. Krupinski was still head of the Jewish ghetto, and he had the cadre, C-A-D-R-E, how do you pronounce it?
Cadre?
Of Jewish policemen. They call them capos, C-A-P-O, that some of the responsibility were delegated to make sure, and they were going over the area and making sure that there's peace and quiet, etc. But infractions, for minimal infractions, that's the same way were the Germans, or by that time I forgot to mention that once they put as in a small ghetto. Of course, there were barbed wires around. And then we had either the Ukrainian or the mostly Ukrainian were the guards. And of course, they behaved much worse than the Germans.
So there was a change in the nature of the guards?
Change of nature of guards. And the Germans were more of overseers rather than taking care of that immediate
Supervision?
peace and mind. For instance, the German officers were supervising the working platoons. There were a number of platoons formed to clear up the deserted areas from the large ghetto, to get all the furniture, to get all the belongings, and to put them all in organized fashion that they were subsequently taken over to Germany or sent to by themselves or sent to the family. So we were carrying the, say, furniture into the trucks, and they were going into a certain part of the city where there was a collection of these. There was some either
What was
goods.
in the trucks? Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Could you explain what was in the trucks? The
The
various
trucks-
items.
The various items were packed up from the area evacuated by before the action. And once the Jews were put in a small ghetto, there was a number of these houses that were uninhabited. So these were clearing up of all the possessions. There were a number of placówki, of places of work in certain heavy industries. Some of them even were staying there through the part of the week and coming only at nights. My brother, for instance, worked in one called Hasag. Hasag was a name of the heavy German industry that was doing the heavy machinery, the war machinery. And he was working there on a regular basis. So every morning, early 6 o'clock, we were getting to the gate of the ghetto, and were taken to various places of work. He and the other groups, they were shipped over to the Hasag factory, and I belonged to the different unit who was cleaning up carrying the furniture. Now, important fact was that, at least at that time, that we thought was that brother having working in the Hasag, there was not only Jewish population, but number of Christian Polacks was working as well. And he got befriended by one Polak who told him that he'll sell him false papers, Aryan papers.
Do you remember who this Polish person was?
I never met him. My brother met him. He was working in a Hasag. And it was obvious that as the situation in a small ghetto proceeded, that there were, for smallest infraction, there were people killed, and sooner or later they had to exterminate everyone. So that's when we decided, let's try to run away from the ghetto. And we got these 3 papers, and of course, number of precautions had to be taken. There was no way we all 3 together could have escaped, because it would have been obvious and recognized that group of 3 people as we were, that we must be Jews, must be Jewish. And of course, the additional complication was not only did we have to be aware of the Germans, but we had to also behave at that time from the Polacks. Because Polacks were just as, maybe even worse, in trying to reveal the Jews to the German. Germans did not have that much of a skill in recognizing whether this is Polak or Jew, especially, for instance, if you take me, that spoke the good cultural Polish language, and by language alone, no one would detect that I am a Jew. Whereas some of the less cultured Jewish people spoke with that heavy Polish accent and was known that they're Jews. But the fine area in between is that the Germans could not see, but the Polacks, they smelled the Jews, quote unquote, that they were able to fish them out, and was so much more important to protect oneself from these elements, from these Polacks.
So what did you do?
Well, my brother bought these 3 documents, that
The false.
ID, false papers.
What false name did you have?
Nowak, N-O-W-A-K, and the first name was Tadeusz Nowak. And we decided, in maybe a few weeks, we talked about the details. There would be probably a suicide for all 3 of us to go away. So what we felt we'll do, my sister, the oldest, and I, the younger of 2 boys, will go first. And we had a name of someone in Poland, some friend, Christian, that will be notifying through him where we landed and what has happened to us. Częstochowa was on the southwestern part of Poland, which was close to Germany. And considering the part of Germany that was Anschluss already, part of Poland that was Anschluss to Germany, was not really far to the border. And one night we went through the border, and in the morning, my sister and I were given the instructions where to go, and arrived at Wrocław. The actual Wrocław is a Polish name. The German name of the big industrial city was Breslau. And in Breslau, we were given place of employment where we should report to. And as we arrived at the station, railroad station, no one could recognize the name of the town where we were supposed to work for a farmer. And they went to the maybe 15, 20 minutes through various books in various parts of Poland and of Germany, though we even mentioned to him that this should be very close to the border. They could not find the place that my sister and I, were directed to. But talking to the Germans, we said, well, what should we do? No trouble, no problem. We'll give you a place where you're going to sleep, and tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, you'll go to the report to the Arbeitsamt, to the working Arbeitsamt, to the labor department, where they'll be assigning jobs for that need to be filled. The whole idea of trying to bypass the Arbeitsamt, or the labor office, to try to avoid physical examination. All Jews were circumcised, and was known anybody found circumcised is Jew no matter what. And we spent, needless to say, a sleepless night, and in the morning we presented in that office. I should also interject at this point that we received a number of instructions how to go about it. Number one, I wore a big cross on my neck. Secondly, there is a medical condition when the prepuce of the penis in some individuals is tight as an inborn kind of a defect, that it does not allow erection of the penis. So this procedure is called phimosis, Phimosis. That practically, literally what they need is a circumcision. So the cousin, a doctor in the ghetto, told me, just say that you have phimosis. One cannot speak German to anybody because the only Polacks who speak German are Jews. It was known. Polacks don't speak German. So you could not show yourself speaking German. So the instructions give, the two precautions that I arranged for, number one is wearing a big cross, and second is to know the word phimosis. And I think that I'd like to take a water break, because now is a very important part that took place, and I may need a little more time.
Thank you.
You close?
Thank you. Tape number 3, July 26, 1995. We're speaking with Dr. Neyman. You were talking before about a certain technique of going undetected. Could you elaborate further, please?
It would have been obvious anyone found uncircumcised in Poles would definitely be considered Jewish. Polacks generally were not circumcised, neither were the Germans. My entire emphasis and plan, scheme was try to avoid a physical examination. But here, having been sent to a non-existent place, I had no recourse but be examined. And we're told to come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, and both my sister and I was sitting there and thinking, what's going to happen? And hours go by, and of course the doctors didn't show up. And what made this date so specifically important, it was my 20th birthday. May 21st, 23 was my birthday. This happened on May 21st, 43. It's almost like my verdict is going to be written. Will I be permitted to stay alive? Oh, once they found out I'm Jew, once they look at me and don't accept my silly excuses, they shoot me. And this goes on, and we are sitting on a hot iron and trying to get this over with, both my sister and of course and I. And maybe took about 4 or 5 hours, somewhere around afternoon, 12, 1 o'clock, a young girl shows up and puts on a white coat. If not for the white coat, I thought that she's just a teenager. Well, my interpolation was probably the reason they couldn't get any doctor before, because all the doctors, of course, were busy with their own German injuries during the war. They couldn't afford any even interns, so I presume this must have been just a young medical student who didn't know much of it and was just embarrassed about it probably as much as I was looking at my penis. And I didn't give her a chance to ask any questions. She looked at me, I was undressed. She looked at my cross on my chest, and I just said, phimosis, phimosis.